My name is Emily Hart. I'm 32 years old, a restaurant owner in San Diego, and until a few weeks ago, I believed that hard work and persistence could shield me from the ugliest parts of envy. I built my dream with my own hands, a restaurant worth $500,000, alive with warmth, laughter, and the smell of rosemary and garlic drifting through the air. It wasn't just a business, it was my home, my stage, my life. If you're watching this, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Sharing your own experiences matters more than you realize, because it reminds people like me that we're not alone in these battles. The night everything burned still plays in my head like a film I never wanted to see. It was just after 2 in the morning when the phone rang. At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe a wrong number. But then the voice on the other end said words that froze me in place. "There's a fire at your restaurant." I drove through the empty streets in my pajamas, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. From several blocks away, I saw it. A violent orange glow stabbing the sky, smoke curling upward like a dark hand. By the time I reached the street, firefighters were already battling the flames, water arcing against a blaze too strong to be tamed. My restaurant, my life's work, was collapsing piece by piece. I stood there numb, the heat pressing against my face, the crackling roar drowning out everything else. The polished oak tables, the imported wine racks, the custom kitchen I had designed down to the last tile. All of it reduced to ash. But the fire itself wasn't the worst part. Somewhere in the chaos, I heard it. Laughter. At first, I thought it was a stranger in the crowd, someone drunk or cruel enough to find entertainment in disaster. But then whispers reached me. "That's her cousin. He's filming it." And just like that, the ground seemed to split beneath me. My own cousin, the one I had once hired to wash dishes when he needed money, the one I had covered for when he couldn't pay rent, was behind this. He hadn't just destroyed my restaurant. He had brought a friend to record my humiliation, to turn my life's ruins into a spectacle. In that moment, grief hardened into something else. Not despair, but clarity. Sharp, merciless clarity. I realized this wasn't just about fire and ash. This was about betrayal, envy, and the kind of cruelty that grows quietly in the people you trust until it consumes everything. As the flames devoured my dream, I made a promise to myself. This wouldn't end here. He thought this video would be my downfall, but it would be his. The fire was declared out just before sunrise, but the smoke lingered like a ghost. By the time the firefighters packed up their hoses, what remained of my restaurant was nothing but a blackened skeleton. The once bright sign that bore my name hung crooked, charred on one side. The windows were shattered, the walls coated in soot. I stood behind the barricade tape, numb, unable to move, as if walking any closer would make it real. The police officer assigned to the scene walked over, his face a mix of exhaustion and formality. He told me they suspected arson, that accelerant had been found near the kitchen entrance. My stomach clenched. It wasn't just an accident. Someone had meant for this to happen. I already knew who. But hearing the word arson was like a nail being hammered into my chest. The officer asked if I had any enemies. I almost laughed. Enemies? I wasn't the kind of person who collected rivals. But then his question echoed in my mind, and all I could see was my cousin's smirk, his phone raised as flames consumed my life. My voice cracked when I mentioned his name. The officer raised an eyebrow, jotting it down without comment, but the weight of the truth pressed harder with every second. As the crowd dispersed and dawn spread across the San Diego sky, I felt the ache in my bones. I had nothing left to do but go home. I collapsed into bed, still smelling of smoke, my hair stiff with ash. Sleep never came. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the fire roaring back to life, heard the faint, cruel laughter of someone who should have been family. By mid-morning, the phone calls began. My aunt's trembling voice, asking if I was okay. A neighbor who had seen the news. Then a long pause before my cousin's name flashed on the screen. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I let it ring, each buzz pulling me deeper into the realization that this wasn't just destruction, it was betrayal. In the hours that followed, memories came rushing back, stitching themselves into a narrative I had ignored for years. The time I helped him with rent when he claimed his boss had cheated him out of a paycheck. The night I gave him shifts at the restaurant, even though he barely worked, because he swore he'd get it together. The sideways comments he'd make when guests praised my cooking. "She's lucky, really." Or, "Anyone could do it with enough money." I'd brushed it off, convinced myself it was insecurity, that he just needed time to grow. But standing in the ashes, I understood. This hadn't been sudden. His envy had been growing, festering, until it lit a match. Later that day, I met with the insurance adjuster. He was polite but clinical, walking me through the paperwork with detached efficiency. He explained that proving arson would complicate things, that recovery could take months, maybe years. Each word felt like another weight tied to my chest. This wasn't going to be a quick fix. My dream wasn't just gone. It was buried under red tape and suspicion. When I finally stepped back into the ruins with the fire marshal, I thought I was prepared. I wasn't. The air was thick with damp soot, the floor crunched with broken glass and charred wood. The kitchen, once gleaming with stainless steel, was a melted, twisted graveyard. I found the outline of the hostess stand, the place where every night began with a smile and a greeting. Now it was nothing but rubble. I sank to my knees, my hands blackened by ash, and for the first time, I let the tears fall. Not just for the building, but for the years I had poured into it, the sleepless nights, the debts I had fought to pay, the milestones celebrated within those walls. All of it stolen in minutes, erased by the selfishness of someone who carried my blood. That evening, news outlets picked up the story. Local headlines read, "Beloved San Diego restaurant destroyed in suspicious fire." The words "suspicious fire" were repeated again and again, and with them came whispers, speculation, curiosity. I should have felt humiliated, exposed. Instead, as I scrolled through the articles, a new fire began to spark inside me. Because if the world was already watching, then so was he. And if my cousin thought the flames would silence me, he had underestimated me entirely. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of his downfall. The day after the fire, I returned to the ruins of my restaurant. The barricade tape still fluttered in the morning wind, a mocking reminder that I was no longer welcome in the place I had built from the ground up. I ducked under it anyway, my shoes crunching over the blackened remains. The silence was deafening. Where once there had been the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, and the sizzle of garlic and hot olive oil, now there was nothing but the whisper of ash shifting under my feet. The dining room had been unrecognizable, but as I stood in the center, I could almost hear echoes of what used to be. The laughter of families celebrating birthdays, the nervous giggle of a couple on their first date, the applause when a surprise proposal was met with a trembling yes. I had given this city a place for moments that mattered. And now, thanks to my cousin, it was gone. The fire marshal had told me not to disturb anything until the investigation was complete, but I couldn't resist tracing the outline of the hostess stand, the spot where every night began. My fingers came away black, smudged with soot. I held them up and thought about how easily everything had turned to dust. Years of labor vanished in a single night of cruelty. When I closed my eyes, memories of the restaurant in its glory days flooded back. The warm light glowing against exposed brick walls, the polished oak bar, always stocked with wines I had chosen myself during trips to Napa, the kitchen, alive with motion, knives chopping, pans sizzling, chefs shouting orders above the rhythm of the work. It had been chaos, but it was mine. And it had been beautiful. Then another memory intruded, sharp and unwelcome. My cousin, standing at that same bar one night, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he told a group of friends, "Emily got lucky, you know. Right place, right time. Anyone could have done it with enough cash." I'd heard him, though he hadn't known I was in earshot. I had swallowed the sting back then, too afraid of confrontation, too desperate to keep the peace. But now, standing in the ashes, I realized those words had been foreshadowing. He had always resented me, always diminished what I had achieved. The fire hadn't been an outburst. It had been the natural end to his bitterness. Later that afternoon, I sat with my lawyer in his office, the blinds drawn against the harsh California sun. He laid out the obstacles with practiced detachment. The insurance company would fight, claiming negligence. The police would need airtight evidence to charge my cousin. Trials could take months, even years. Each phrase he spoke landed like a stone on my chest. But when he mentioned the video, the one his friend had filmed, I leaned forward. That recording wasn't just evidence. It was a confession delivered in pixels and sound. My cousin's voice, his laugh, his presence at the scene of the crime. It wasn't speculation. It was proof. That night, alone in my apartment, I watched the video for the first time. My hands shook as I pressed play. There it was, my restaurant, my sanctuary, engulfed in flames. The camera wobbled, the voice behind it chuckling like it was all some twisted joke. Then, clear as day, my cousin's laugh cut through, cruel and unrepentant. My chest tightened, rage burning hotter than the fire I was forced to relive. I paused the video, rewound, played it again. Each time the sound of his laugh struck me harder, until it felt etched into my skull. This wasn't just evidence. This was his downfall, waiting to be set in motion. Over the next few days, I withdrew into silence. Friends reached out, family members called, but I answered almost no one. What could I say? That I was fine? That I wasn't falling apart? Both would have been lies. Instead, I sat in the quiet, letting the weight of my cousin's betrayal sink in. Silence became my shield, my way of keeping control in a life that had spun violently out of it. But silence also gave me space to plan. In that void, I began to imagine how this would end. Not with me begging for scraps of sympathy. Not with my cousin smirking at family gatherings, knowing he had gutted me. No, it would end with him stripped of everything he thought he had taken from me. The world already had its eyes on the fire. The headlines had traveled further than I'd expected. Reporters had called, asking for comments I wasn't ready to give. But I knew, deep down, that the story wasn't done yet. The video hadn't surfaced publicly, not yet, and when it did, the humiliation wouldn't be mine. It would be his. On the fourth night after the fire, I stood at my window overlooking the city, the lights flickering below like distant stars. I thought about the girl I had been before this, the one who believed family could be trusted, the one who stayed quiet to avoid making waves. That girl had died in the flames with my restaurant. What rose from the ashes was something else entirely, someone colder, sharper, and unwilling to be erased. The silence wasn't emptiness anymore. It was power, and soon it would be the prelude to his ruin. The first time I saw the video, it was on my own phone, sent anonymously. But the first time I realized it had escaped into the world was 3 days later, when a notification popped up on my feed. San Diego Blaze, was it an inside job? I clicked, my stomach twisting, and there it was. The same footage I had forced myself to watch in private now playing on a stranger's account, viewed thousands of times. My restaurant burning, flames roaring into the night, captured not as tragedy, but as spectacle. The comments scrolled beneath in real time. That's insane. Who would laugh during this? Is that a voice in the background? And then I heard it again. That unmistakable laugh, my cousin's laugh, woven into the soundtrack of my destruction. The video spread fast. By evening, it had been reposted by local news stations, then picked up by bigger outlets. Headlines buzzed with speculation. Suspicious fire at beloved restaurant caught on tape. Anchors spoke over blurred clips, pointing out the laughter in the background, the way the camera seemed to linger too long to be a coincidence. I should have felt exposed, humiliated. Instead, watching the views climb into the hundreds of thousands, I felt a strange satisfaction. He had wanted the fire to be my shame, but it was quickly becoming his. That night, I couldn't sleep. I scrolled through every repost, every comment section. Strangers were dissecting the audio, debating whether the laugh was staged or real. Some speculated about motives, others called it sick, disgusting, inhuman. A few mentioned me directly. Emily Hart doesn't deserve this. She worked for years and some psycho cousin ruins it? They didn't even know the full truth, but they were already aligning themselves with me. By the next morning, my cousin's name started slipping into the rumor mill. People remembered seeing him at the restaurant weeks before, noticed his absence when the fire was first reported. Someone had tagged him in a repost of the video with a single word: explain. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone, feeling both the dread and the power of it. This was no longer just a family wound. It was public. It was irreversible. Around noon, my aunt called, her voice frantic. She begged me to shut this down before it went too far, insisting that family matters shouldn't be played out for the world. Her words cut, but not in the way she intended. Because for me, the world watching wasn't the problem. It was the solution. For once, I wasn't the one silenced. The story wasn't under his control. Later that afternoon, a reporter left a voicemail asking if I'd like to comment. My lawyer advised against it, telling me to let the investigation take its course. But I knew silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was strategy. If I spoke now, I'd be dragged into defending myself. But if I waited, the evidence would keep building, and the world would draw its own conclusions. That evening, I watched the video again. This time, I noticed something I hadn't before. The friend holding the camera, his voice slipping out as he cracked a joke. It wasn't just my cousin. He had accomplices. That realization sent a rush of cold determination through me. They hadn't just tried to burn down a building. They had tried to burn down my dignity, my reputation, my future. But they had made one fatal mistake. They documented it. The next few days unfolded like a storm. News trucks parked outside my apartment. Paparazzi-style photographers snapped pictures of me walking to my car. Online forums lit up with theories, some wild, some painfully accurate. My cousin's face began circulating, pulled from old social media photos paired with captions like, "The laugh behind the fire." His friend's identity was leaked soon after. My cousin tried to fight back. He posted a shaky video online claiming he had nothing to do with the fire, that the laugh was edited, that people were trying to ruin his life. But his denial only fueled the fire. The comment sections shredded him apart, pointing out inconsistencies, mocking his attempt at damage control. If he thought public sympathy would save him, he was wrong. The court of opinion had already spoken. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I didn't need to argue. The footage was enough. Every view, every repost was another nail in the coffin of their credibility. My silence became louder than any denial they could make. Still, the backlash wasn't without cost. My phone buzzed endlessly with calls from relatives demanding explanations. Some accused me of orchestrating the exposure, as if I had leaked the video myself. Others begged me to forgive, to move on. But forgiveness was a currency I was done spending. One night, sitting in the dark of my apartment, I realized something important. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about reclaiming the narrative. For years, my cousin had painted me as lucky, spoiled, someone who didn't deserve what I built. Now the entire world could see who he really was: petty, cruel, and reckless enough to set fire to family. By the end of the week, the story had gone national. The video was everywhere. From morning talk shows to late-night commentary. People weren't just outraged, they were invested. And in their outrage, I found strength. Because for the first time since the fire, I wasn't the victim of this story. I was the center of it. And I was holding the match that would burn their lives down just as surely as they had burned mine. Envy doesn't start as fire. It starts as a spark, a sideways glance, a bitter laugh, a quiet comment that cuts deeper than it should. And as I sat alone in my apartment, scrolling through the endless posts about the video, I realized that my cousin's hatred hadn't been born the night of the fire. It had been growing for years, feeding on every one of my small victories, until it finally exploded into flames. We grew up only a few miles apart, children of siblings who were close enough to blur the lines between family and neighbors. He was always around, at birthdays, at school events, tagging along on summer afternoons when the adults gathered in backyards with barbecues. From the outside, we must have looked like siblings ourselves. But beneath the surface, something was wrong. I was the kid who excelled quietly, the one who brought home good grades and saved babysitting money for books. He was the kid who coasted, charming enough to talk his way out of trouble, reckless enough to fall into it again. Our family didn't hide the comparisons. At dinners, aunts would beam at my report cards, uncles would clap my shoulder with a proud smile. Then, turning to him, their words shifted. "You'll find your way," or "not everyone's a scholar." I didn't see the poison building then, but I can see it clearly now. When I was 16, I got my first part-time job at a cafe. It wasn't glamorous. I washed dishes, wiped tables, refilled sugar containers until my fingers stuck with granules. But it was mine. On the nights I came home smelling of coffee and burnt toast, I felt proud. My cousin mocked me. "You smell like grease," he'd say, pinching his nose. I laughed it off. But the truth was, he couldn't stand the sight of me working towards something, even then. College widened the gap. I earned a scholarship, the first in our family to leave home for something bigger. He stayed behind, drifting from one odd job to another, always with an excuse ready. When I came back on breaks, I could feel the tension in the way he asked about classes, the way his smile never reached his eyes. "Must be nice," he'd mutter when I talked about campus life. The resentment only sharpened when I opened my restaurant. I invited him to the grand opening, even gave him a job in the kitchen washing dishes. I told myself it was family helping family. But within weeks, he started missing shifts, showing up late, pocketing tips meant for servers. When I confronted him, he snapped, "You think you're better than me because you got lucky? This place isn't success, it's a joke." I should have fired him then. I should have cut the tie before it strangled me. But guilt held me back. I told myself he just needed guidance, that he'd eventually grow up. I loaned him money when he claimed he couldn't pay rent, covered his mistakes when he embarrassed himself at work, even let him crash on my couch once when his landlord kicked him out. Each time I told myself I was doing the right thing. Each time he grew bolder, more entitled. The turning point came one Thanksgiving, a few years ago. The family gathered at my parents' house, the table heavy with turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce. Conversation turned to my restaurant, how well it was doing, how proud everyone was. My cousin sat across from me, his fork stabbing into mashed potatoes with a little too much force. "Yeah," he said, loud enough to silence the table. "Emily got lucky. She had the money. Not everyone has that." I remember the sting, the heat in my cheeks as the family shifted uncomfortably. No one corrected him, no one reminded him how many nights I'd worked until dawn, how many debts I'd clawed my way through. They let his words hang there, poisoning the air. That was the first time I truly felt the depth of his resentment. And yet, I still didn't see how far he would go. As I replayed these memories now, the fire no longer felt like an isolated act of madness. It was the final step in a long progression. The smirks, the bitter comments, the mockery, all the sparks had finally caught. And in his arrogance, he hadn't just tried to destroy me. He had exposed himself to the world. Scrolling through the endless stream of articles and posts, I found myself studying his face in old photos, the forced smile, the darting eyes. People online were tearing him apart, mocking his denials, replaying the video until his laugh became infamous. The nickname "the laugh behind the fire" was spreading like wildfire. Part of me wanted to pity him. After all, envy is a prison, and he had locked himself inside it long before the flames ever touched my restaurant. But pity was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. He had taken too much from me. Not just my building, not just my livelihood, but the trust I had once had in family. That night, I sat at my desk, pen scratching across a notebook as I wrote down names, dates, memories. Every moment he had revealed his resentment, every time I had let it slide. This wasn't just nostalgia. It was evidence, a pattern of behavior, A history of envy that would soon be painted for everyone to see: police, court, and the public. Because revenge, I realized, isn't just about striking back. It's about telling the story he tried to bury, and this time, the story wasn't his to control. It was mine. Grief has a way of making people passive, like a tide that drags you under and convinces you there's no point in swimming. But rage? Rage does the opposite. It sharpens you, keeps your eyes open in the dark, demands you fight your way to the surface. By the end of that week, I wasn't drowning anymore. I was planning. The first step was obvious: evidence. The video was already everywhere, dissected by strangers, replayed on news broadcasts, turned into memes and hashtags. But I knew I needed more than viral outrage. If I wanted real consequences, I had to build a case that no one could ignore. Not the police, not the courts, not even the family members begging me to let it go. My lawyer, a sharp man named Marcus Reed, leaned back in his chair as I explained what I wanted. "Emily," he said carefully, "you don't just want justice. You want destruction?" I didn't flinch. "Yes," I answered, "because that's what they gave me." Marcus nodded slowly, then slid a legal pad across the desk. "Then we start here." We began with the digital trail. My cousin wasn't smart enough to cover his tracks. Investigators quickly unearthed text messages between him and the friend who had filmed everything. Messages that dripped with malice. "Tonight's the night. She thinks she's better than us. Wait until people see this." Each line was another nail in the coffin. I remember holding Marcus's phone as he read the texts aloud, my hands trembling not with sorrow but with vindication. It was all there. Proof that it hadn't been impulsive. Proof that it had been planned, deliberate, cruel. Next came the financial evidence. Credit card statements showed my cousin buying gallons of gasoline at a station just blocks from my restaurant hours before the fire. Security cameras caught him walking out of the store, smirking, lighter in hand. It was almost too easy, as if arrogance had blinded him into thinking no one would bother to connect the dots. When Marcus presented me with the file, thick with printed receipts and photos, I felt the closest thing to relief I had experienced since the fire. "This," he said, tapping the folder, "isn't just evidence. This is your weapon. But weapons mean little if you don't know when to use them." And timing was everything. While Marcus and the investigators built the legal case, I stayed quiet in public. I ignored reporters, resisted the urge to post statements online. My silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Every day the story grew without me saying a word. The video was still spreading, the speculation still mounting, and the less I said, the more people filled the silence with their own conclusions. Meanwhile, the phone calls from family kept coming. My aunt begged me to forgive him, her voice cracking as she insisted, "He's young, Emily. He made a mistake." Mistake. That word tasted bitter. Burning down my life's work wasn't a mistake. It was intent. Another uncle accused me of being cruel for not stepping in to stop the gossip online. As if I controlled the internet. As if I had started this fire myself. "Family is family," he said firmly. "We don't destroy each other." I almost laughed. He already did. But I didn't argue. I let their words wash over me like static, because I knew they didn't understand what I had already decided. This wasn't just about one fire. It was about years of belittlement, of being dismissed, of swallowing insults to keep the peace. That peace had burned with my restaurant, and I had no intention of rebuilding it. Instead, I rebuilt myself. I spent hours with Marcus, going over strategies, preparing for every defense my cousin might attempt. He would claim jealousy wasn't motive enough. He would insist the laugh wasn't his. He would try to frame it as an accident. But the evidence was too strong, too detailed. Gasoline purchases, text messages, witnesses, and above all, the video. At night, I sat at my desk, sketching out more than just legal steps. I wrote down names of reporters who had called me, drafted a list of talking points I might release one day when the timing was perfect. I even started contacting trusted friends in PR, asking what it would take to control the narrative when the trial came. If he wanted attention, I would give him more than he could ever handle. But revenge, I knew, had to be layered. If I moved too fast, I'd look reckless. If I moved too slow, sympathy for him might grow. I had to strike with precision when the pressure was at its peak, when denial had exhausted itself, and all that remained was exposure. And so, I waited. I waited as the news cycles turned from curiosity to outrage. I waited as my cousin scrambled, posting shaky denials that only made him look guiltier. I waited as the family splintered into those who defended him blindly, and those who finally, reluctantly admitted what they saw with their own eyes. Each day that passed, I felt my power grow, because for once, I wasn't reacting. I was dictating. On the 10th day after the fire, Marcus looked at me across his desk and said, "We're ready." I nodded, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Ready. It was such a simple word, but it carried the weight of everything I had lost, and everything I was about to reclaim. The plan was no longer just an idea scribbled in notebooks. It was a living thing, built from evidence, strategy, and silence. And soon, it would devour the man who thought he could burn me into ashes. Because fire may destroy wood and stone, but truth destroys legacies. And my cousin's was about to collapse. Families like to think they know how to keep their own in line. They use guilt, tradition, whispered conversations over dinner tables. They lean on the idea that blood is thicker than justice, thicker than truth. But when the truth is fire and ashes, no amount of guilt can douse it. The pressure began quietly, in half-hearted phone calls from distant relatives. At first it was concern. "Emily, are you eating? Are you sleeping?" But it quickly shifted, like a current pulling me under. "You've made your point. Don't ruin his life." "This is embarrassing for all of us. You'll regret dragging family through the courts." I didn't answer most of them. My silence became its own answer. But the weight of their words pressed against me late at night, when the apartment was too quiet, when the glow of the burned-out restaurant replayed behind my eyelids. They didn't see the destruction the way I did. They hadn't stood in the ashes. They only saw the scandal. Then came the visit I hadn't expected. My Aunt Sarah, one of the few family members who had always been kind to me, showed up at my door. She looked smaller than I remembered, her face lined with the kind of worry that ages people before their time. She carried a casserole dish, like this was just another family tragedy that could be softened with food. "I don't know what to say to you," she admitted, setting the dish on my counter. "But I know I can't stand by and watch this family tear itself apart." Her voice broke when she said family, as though the word itself had betrayed her. I wanted to hug her, to let her comfort me the way she always had. But instead, I asked the question that sat like a stone in my chest. "Do you believe me?" Her eyes watered. She nodded, but slowly, reluctantly. "Emily, I know he's troubled. I know he's jealous. But prison? Is that really what you want for him?" I stared at her. Prison? That word felt like a chasm between us. What I want, I thought, is my life back. My restaurant. My peace. My dignity. But what I said was simpler. What I want is accountability. She sighed, rubbing her temples. Sometimes accountability destroys more than it saves. Her words echoed long after she left, the casserole untouched on my counter. The very next day, my phone buzzed with a message from my Uncle James. His tone was different, harder, sharper. "Drop this, Emily. It's gone too far. You don't understand what you're doing to the family's name. The family's name, not my name, not my restaurant, my work, my livelihood, theirs." The message made me laugh, a bitter sound that felt like it belonged to someone else, because that was the truth, wasn't it? They were less worried about justice and more worried about appearances. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with Marcus, my lawyer, going over the mounting evidence. He noticed the tension in my face and asked what was wrong. I told him about the calls, the visits, the pressure. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "This happens all the time," he said. "The closer you get to exposing the truth, the more people will try to stop you. Not because they care about him, but because they care about themselves. They want comfort, not justice. I realized then that Marcus wasn't just my lawyer. He was the only person speaking to me without layers of guilt or obligation. His clarity steadied me. Still, the pressure didn't stop. My cousin himself finally reached out, this time through a voicemail that oozed manipulation. His voice was falsely calm, even friendly. "Emily, I know you're angry, but you're blowing this out of proportion. You don't want to ruin me over one mistake, do you? We're family. That word again. It was almost laughable. I replayed the voicemail twice, studying his tone, listening for cracks in the mask. There it was, the arrogance, the assumption that I would fold the way I always had. He thought I was still the girl who swallowed insults at Thanksgiving dinner, who kept peace at the cost of her own dignity. He didn't understand that she had burned in the fire too. The next weekend, I attended a family gathering for the first time since the fire. It wasn't at my parents' house or even my aunt's. It was at a cousin's apartment, small and cramped, but heavy with tension. The air was thick with whispers before I even walked in. Heads turned. Conversations hushed. My cousin wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. But his absence felt staged, a ghost looming over every awkward glance. My uncle approached me almost immediately, his voice low. "Do you really want to do this to us?" I looked him in the eye and answered, "He did this. Not me." The silence that followed was sharper than shouting. Dinner that night was unbearable. Every bite tasted like ashes. I sat through half-hearted small talk, my hands clenched under the table, until I couldn't anymore. I excused myself, stood up, and left without explanation. As I walked out into the night air, I realized something important. I didn't owe them explanations. Not anymore. Back in my car, the city lights blurred as tears filled my eyes. But they weren't tears of weakness. They were the release of something I'd carried too long. The need to be understood, accepted, validated by people who had chosen silence over truth. Driving home, I promised myself one thing. I would not bend. Not to their guilt, not to their pressure, not to their false appeals to family. My loyalty wasn't to blood anymore. It was to the truth. Because families may circle the wagons to protect their own, but this time, the one they were protecting had set the fire himself. And I was done playing the part of the quiet, obedient relative. This time, I would not be silenced. I knew the day would come when I'd have to face him, not through a voicemail or a headline, not through family members acting as messengers, but face to face. For weeks, I had avoided it, building my case in silence while the world chewed on the video. But silence could only hold so long. Eventually, predators test the fence to see if it will break. It happened on a gray afternoon, the kind where the sky feels too heavy, pressing low over the city. I was leaving Marcus's office when I saw him. My cousin was leaning against a car across the street, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, eyes locked on me. For a moment, neither of us moved. He looked thinner than I remembered, his face pale, the arrogance in his posture fraying at the edges. He crossed the street slowly, a smirk twisting his mouth like he still believed he had power. "Emily," he said, dragging out the syllables. "We need to talk." I didn't answer. I simply stood there, arms crossed, waiting. Let him fill the silence. "You're ruining my life," he started, his voice carrying a shaky confidence. "All because of some stupid mistake. You're blowing this way out of proportion?" I tilted my head, studying him like an insect under glass. "A mistake," I repeated flatly. "You call burning down my restaurant a mistake?" His eyes flickered, just for a second, but then the smirk returned. "No one can prove it was me. That video doesn't show my face. People laugh the same way, Emily. You're letting strangers online decide the truth." I almost laughed. The texts, the receipts, the cameras. Should I keep going? His jaw tightened. He hadn't expected me to be so prepared, so steady. He had imagined I would still be trembling, still broken. But the ashes of my restaurant had hardened me into something else. "You've always hated me," he spat suddenly, his voice louder now, drawing the attention of a passerby. "Since we were kids. You wanted everyone to think you were better. Perfect Emily. The star. You think you're some kind of hero now?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice until he had to lean in to hear me. "No, I don't need to be a hero. I just need you to face what you did." He blinked, caught off guard by the calmness in my tone. Anger. He could fight. Calm? Calm unnerved him. "I didn't do anything," he tried again, his voice cracking. "You're just—" I cut him off. "You laughed. You laughed while everything I built turned to ash. The whole world heard it. That's who you are, and you can't run from it anymore." For the first time, the smirk slipped. His lips pressed together, his eyes darting away. He muttered something I couldn't catch, then said louder, "If you keep pushing this, you'll regret it. You're going to destroy this family." There it was, the line they all clung to, the illusion of unity. I felt something inside me settle as I answered, "No. You destroyed this family. I'm just making sure people see it." He flinched, as if the words had cut deeper than shouting ever could. For a moment, I thought he might lunge at me, but he didn't. Instead, he shoved his hands deeper into his pockets and stepped back. His eyes burned with something between hatred and desperation. "This isn't over," he hissed. I smiled, a small, sharp curve of my mouth. "No, it's just beginning." He stormed off, his steps uneven, shoulders hunched like the weight of the world had finally started to crush him. I stood there, watching until he disappeared around the corner. My hands were steady, my breath even. For the first time, I realized he no longer frightened me. That evening, I told Marcus what had happened. He frowned, then nodded. "He's trying to intimidate you. Don't let him. He's unraveling, Emily. The stronger you stay, the weaker he gets." And he was right. Over the next few days, whispers spread through the family. Some claimed I had provoked him. Others said he had begged me for mercy. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was that he was no longer in control of the story. Every time he opened his mouth, he gave himself away. I found myself remembering the boy he used to be, the one who mocked my cafe job, who sneered when I came home with scholarship letters. Back then, I had always stayed silent, letting his bitterness slide past me. But now, the silence belonged to me. It was no longer submission. It was power. Because confrontation doesn't always mean screaming. Sometimes it's standing still while the other person thrashes, refusing to give them the chaos they're searching for. Sometimes it's looking them in the eye and reminding them that the world already knows. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the echo of his words looping in my mind. "You'll regret it." But instead of fear, I felt clarity. He was scared. Scared of prison. Scared of exposure. Scared that for once, his arrogance couldn't shield him. And I knew then that the confrontation hadn't weakened me. It had cemented me. He had tried to burn down my life. But in the ashes, I had found something indestructible. Resolve. Courtrooms have a way of stripping people bare. The wood paneling, the echo of footsteps, the murmurs that fade into silence when the judge enters. All of it feels designed to remind you that nothing stays hidden forever. The first hearing was packed. Reporters filled the benches at the back, notebooks open, cameras perched like vultures waiting to swoop. Family members lined the rows too, some sitting stiffly behind me, others clustered near my cousin as if proximity could shield him. The divide was visible, carved down the center of the room like a scar. I sat at the front with Marcus, my lawyer. My hands were folded tightly in my lap, but inside, I felt steady. Weeks of silence, of preparation, had led me here. This was no longer whispers at family dinners or arguments in cramped kitchens. This was official. When they brought my cousin in, he looked smaller than I remembered, his arrogance swallowed by the fluorescent lights and the sharp suits around him. He avoided my eyes, scanning the room instead, as though searching for sympathy. His lawyer whispered in his ear, but his jaw was tight, his lips pressed into a line. The charges were read aloud: arson, reckless endangerment, conspiracy. Each word echoed like a hammer strike. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, but the judge's gavel cut through them quickly. My cousin's voice cracked when he entered his plea. Not guilty. Of course. The prosecution began by presenting the evidence. First, the credit card receipts for gasoline. Then the grainy security footage from the station showing him walking out with containers in hand. The jury leaned forward, pens scratching across paper. Then came the texts. Projected on a screen, each line lit up like a neon confession. Tonight's the night. She won't see it coming. Wait until people see this. The words hung heavy in the room, undeniable. I watched his lawyer squirm, trying to object, but the judge overruled. And then, inevitably, the video. The screen flickered, and there it was. My restaurant, alive in flames, the laughter cutting through like a knife. My chest tightened as the sound filled the courtroom as jurors turned their heads toward my cousin. Some shook their heads. Others stared at him with narrowed eyes. That laugh, his laugh, was now immortal, evidence no denial could erase. My cousin shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his tie, his face flushing. His lawyer leaned forward, whispering frantically, but it didn't matter. The room had heard it. The world had heard it. Reporters scribbled faster. Cameras clicked. I knew what the headlines would say by morning. The laugh behind the fire. When the prosecution rested, his defense tried to claw back ground. They argued the video was edited, the laugh coincidental. They claimed the texts were taken out of context, inside jokes twisted into accusations. They painted me as vindictive, desperate to destroy him, but every word sounded weaker than the last. The jury wasn't buying it. I could see it in their eyes, the way they flicked between me, calm and steady, and him, sweating under the weight of his own arrogance. During a recess, I stepped into the hallway where reporters swarmed. Microphones shoved toward me. Questions flew like arrows. Emily, do you feel vindicated? What do you want to see happen to your cousin? Do you think justice will be served? I didn't answer them all. I gave one simple statement. This isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. He took everything from me, and the evidence speaks for itself. Then I walked away, leaving them clamoring behind me. Inside, my heart was racing, but outwardly I was calm. Silence and precision, those were my weapons now. As the trial stretched on, the weight of it bled into the family. Some avoided me entirely, refusing to choose sides in public. Others whispered apologies when no one else was watching, their guilt obvious. But the loudest voices were the ones condemning me, claiming I was airing dirty laundry, that I should have kept this private. Private. The word almost made me laugh. He had burned my life in public, his friend had filmed it, and the world had watched. Privacy was long gone. All that was left was truth. When I finally took the stand, the courtroom quieted. Marcus guided me through the testimony. My history with the restaurant, the night of the fire, the video. I kept my voice steady, even when the defense tried to rattle me. Isn't it true, the defense lawyer asked, his tone oily, that you have always had tension with your cousin? That you were jealous of him? I met his gaze, unflinching. No, he was jealous of me. And now, you can all see why gasps rippled through the room. My cousin shifted in his seat, glaring at me with pure venom, but it didn't matter anymore. The jury had seen the truth. The world had too. By the time the closing arguments began, I no longer cared about the whispers or the accusations of betrayal. This wasn't about family loyalty. This was about justice, about standing in the ashes and refusing to bow my head. When the judge adjourned for the day, the reporters swarmed again, headlines already forming. My cousin slumped in his seat, his mask cracking under the weight of exposure. I walked out of that courtroom taller than I had in months, the air in my lungs sharp and clean. The judgment hadn't been delivered yet, but in many ways, it already had. Because the moment his laugh echoed through that courtroom, the world stopped seeing me as a victim and started seeing him as the arsonist he was. And that was the first step in taking everything back. The final day of the trial felt heavier than all the ones before. The courthouse buzzed with anticipation, reporters clustered on the steps like birds waiting for crumbs. Inside, the atmosphere was taut, every cough, every shuffle amplified by the silence of expectation. This wasn't just another day in court. This was the day judgment would fall. I walked into the room with Marcus at my side. My cousin was already seated at the defense table. He looked gaunt, shadows etched under his eyes, his once cocky posture now deflated. For weeks he had tried to maintain the mask, the smirk, the denial, the feigned indifference. But masks eventually crack. Today, his had shattered completely. The jury filed in one by one, their faces unreadable. I studied them anyway, searching for a clue in the tightness of a jaw, the flicker of an eye. My heart thudded, steady but strong. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him, not of the verdict. Whatever came, the truth had already been exposed. The judge entered, robes flowing, gavel striking once. Court is now in session. The foreperson of the jury stood, a sheet of paper trembling slightly in his hands. The silence stretched thin, so sharp it felt like it could cut. On the charge of arson, he began, we find the defendant guilty. A wave of sound rippled through the courtroom. Gasps, whispers, the frantic scratching of pens. My cousin flinched as though struck. On the charge of reckless endangerment, the foreperson continued, we find the defendant guilty. Another wave, heavier this time. On the charge of conspiracy, he finished, we find the defendant guilty. The gavel struck again, calling the room to order, but the sound barely registered over the roar of blood in my ears. Guilty. The word echoed like a drumbeat, steady and undeniable. I glanced at my cousin then, and for the first time, he looked small, truly small. His face had drained of color, his mouth slack, eyes darting wildly as though searching for an exit that didn't exist. The friend who had filmed the fire wasn't there to smirk with him now. He was alone, and the world knew him for what he was. The judge moved quickly into sentencing. Given the severity of the crime, the deliberate planning, and the endangerment to lives, the court hereby sentences the defendant to 15 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 10 gasps again. The number hit like a thunderclap. My cousin slumped in his seat, his lawyer whispering frantically, but there was nothing to soften the blow. 15 years, 10 of them locked, no escape. And just like that, his arrogance, his smirk, his laugh, the laugh that had haunted me, was gone. I sat still, my hands folded tightly in my lap. No tears came, no rush of gloating triumph. What I felt was steadier, deeper, a release. The weight I had carried since the night of the fire lifted, not all at once, but in slow, deliberate pieces, like chains being unlocked. After the gavel fell for the last time, the courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed to the doors. Family members whispered sharply to each other, some avoiding my gaze entirely. My Aunt Sarah caught my eye from across the room, her face pale but her lips pressed together in something that looked like quiet acceptance. My Uncle James, on the other hand, shook his head, muttering to anyone who would listen about betrayal and family loyalty. But their words no longer mattered. As guards led my cousin away, he turned once, his eyes locking with mine. There was no plea in them, no apology. Only hatred. Cold, burning, impotent hatred. But even that had lost its sting. Because hatred without power is nothing. And now, he had none. Outside the courthouse, the cameras were waiting. Microphones shoved toward me, questions shouted over each other. Emily, do you feel vindicated? What does justice mean to you? What would you say to your cousin now? I raised a hand for silence, my voice calm when I finally spoke. This isn't about revenge. This is about truth. He tried to take everything from me, but today, justice gave me back my voice. And no one can burn that down. The crowd erupted, flashes blinding, pens racing. I didn't linger. I had said what needed to be said. Nothing more. That night, I returned to the site of the restaurant. The rubble had long been cleared, the lot fenced off, waiting for its next chapter. I stood there for a long time, the cool night air brushing against my face. I remembered the first time I unlocked those doors, the smell of fresh paint and varnished wood, the way my hands shook with excitement as I flipped on the lights. I remembered the laughter, the clinking glasses, the soft music floating through the dining room, and I remembered the fire, the flames swallowing it all. But now, standing there, I also remembered the verdict. Guilty. 15 years. Justice. The building was gone, but I was still here, stronger, unbroken. I thought about rebuilding. Not the restaurant, not exactly, but something new. Something that carried the spirit of what I had created, but also the strength of what I had survived. For the first time in months, I felt the stirrings of possibility. When I finally turned to leave, I whispered into the empty lot, "You didn't win." And for once, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt free.